for another day, but knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever go back. Of all the roads that I've taken in my life, the road that I wish I could have left not taken was the road accompanying my partner down that ugly path of mental illness. Pete had an AIDS diagnosis, and for the first few years of that diagnosis, he had his garden variety opportunistic infections, thrush, pneumonia, neuropathy. Then he got walloped with toxoplasmosis. It's a bacterial infection of the brain that leaves scars and lesions on every region of your brain and affects psychic activity. Combining that with a crazy childhood, growing up in the South in Alabama, rejected by family and friends because he was gay, made a perfect combination for psychic breakdown. He started spiraling out of control. He was in hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, days at a time. Then he'd get out, and he was really trying to turn things around. There were a couple of times that he did some harm to himself, so he'd stay for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks, and we were trying to turn this around. We really wanted to do it. It wasn't for lack of trying. He was subjected to electroconvulsive therapy. He had transcranial magnetic stimulation. He had lithium treatments. He was on a number of different drugs. None of them were working, but we were committed to finding a way out of this, and we were committed to each other. And then I learned the ugly definition of that word as well, committed. It was a cold January morning, and Pete insisted on going to a psychiatrist appointment on his own, and I said, go ahead, you got it. And he didn't come back. I was a wreck. He disappeared. Whole night gone, checked with family, friends, cops, nothing. At 6:30 the next morning, I get this phone call with this garbled voice of Peter trying to make sense. And I got out of him that he was in a dive motel in Jersey City. Rushed over there, asked for his room, which he paid for in cash. That's why I couldn't trace him. And he was in the room, passed out, with 2 empty aspirin bottles, his empty psychotropic medicine bottles, and his empty HIV bottles. I picked him up, brought him to the car, rushed right to the hospital, and he was admitted right away. Waited in the waiting room, and I was used to that drill too, and the doctor finally came out. And I got the message that I usually get. He's alive. He's going to survive. But what I usually heard after that was, and he's going to stay 2 weeks in the hospital, because insurance companies, after 2 weeks, deem you sane and let you out. But this time the doctor said to me, 3 physicians have agreed to petition the judge and mandate that Peter be committed to the Meadowview State Psychiatric Hospital in Secaucus, New Jersey. And he was trapped. And there was no way I was going to get him out of there. They said, he's going in this afternoon. Go home, pack his bag. You can visit with him tonight at the hospital in Secaucus. So I went home, and I knew the drill for that too. No clothes with drawstrings, no shoes with shoelaces, no razor blade, no nail clippers, and only prescribed reading material. I was rushing out the door, and I just picked up the Norton Anthology of Poetry and threw it in a bag and ran off. I get there, and he is just waking up. And his eyes open, and he looks at me, and he says the line that I got very used to, I fucked up again, and I'm so sorry. And then he asked, where am I? And I said, you're in the State Psychiatric Hospital in Secaucus, New Jersey. And he had a glint in his eye, and he started smirking and chuckling. Even in his mental illness, he had this droll southern charm of humor, but I was in no mood. And I screamed, what the fuck is so funny? And he looked up at me and said, I'm just so sorry, Richard, but being insane in Secaucus, New Jersey is just a bit redundant. I did laugh a bit. I had nothing to say to him, though, because I was so angry. We went to the waiting room, the visiting room, and we didn't speak for an hour. In the second hour, the same thing. And then finally, at the end of it, with about a half an hour ago, I said, let me read you a poem. And I read him a poem. And I gave him the book, and I said, now you read me a poem. And he read me a poem. That started our tradition of nightly reading one poem to each other. And this poetry was our haven, our refuge. It was a way to get out of ourselves and just listen to it. There was no rhyme or reason. There was no discussing the poems. The most we ever said to each other was, geez, that was a really good poem, or I didn't get that one at all. And we just went on from there. Just the reading of it was enough, back and forth to each other. And there was a ritual to our visits. It would always start with him pissing and moaning about his support groups, and then we'd visit a little bit more, and then we'd read the poetry. And that was enough to keep us going. There was just something so special about that. On the 4th of July, 2012, after 6 months in the state psychiatric hospital, Pete was released. And on the 2nd of August, less than a month later, Pete decided to end his life. This isn't a story about Pete's suicide. I'm not ready to tell that story yet. It's more a reflection for me, for all of us, not just for me. It's more of a reflection that, yes, there is hope. There was this great poet that had this line, how it was never or always the same. This movement from mastery to mess. And I didn't know if I was making a mastery or a mess out of it, but I had to try. What I did learn from that in this reflection was a line from another poem to keep going, because I know there's always hope. And that line was, as long as the earth continues its stony breathing, I will breathe. There is always hope in a trap. There is always a way out. There is always somebody to reach out to. There is always poetry. Thank you.